The two Mrs. Cranes goes from chaos to chaos, and I absolutely love it. This is the first episode of the fourth season of Frasier. This is directed by David Lee, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I talk about what happens in this episode. It is such a strong start to season 4. In fact, it's the 5th top-rated Frasier episode of all time on IMDb. And it does not surprise me. So as I said, there will be spoilers from now as I talk about what happens. It starts off with Niles tweezing his muffin. And Martin comes in and his old platoon are getting back together. They're going to Rattlesnake Ridge. He can take somebody with him. He eventually manages to, I was going to say persuade Frasier, but it's more guilt-tripping Frasier. And Daphne then comes in and apparently somebody called Clive has phoned for her. And he's going to phone back, and he does pretty quickly. And it turns out that Clive is her ex-fiancé. And when she left him, she said that if they were both still single in 5 years' time, they could give the relationship another go. And it has been 5 years. And Clive is coming to take Daphne up on that. We have a brief trip to KCL, and Gil is there. It's nice to go down to KCL very briefly, but then we're back at Frasier's apartment for the rest of the episode. And it's basically from now that things begin to escalate rather rapidly. Daphne is trying on some very unflattering clothing. I still think she looks fantastic, but she's trying to find an outfit that isn't going to attract Clive. Niles then comes over with a 1,000-piece kitten jigsaw, and then Clive arrives. He's played by Scott Atkinson, and he wastes no time. He comes straight out with it, basically telling Daphne he loves her, he wants to be with her, and Daphne, desperately trying to find a way out of this, says, "I'd like you to meet Dr. Niles Crane, my husband." Niles' reaction at that point was brilliant. Frasier then comes into the room pretty quickly after that, and they manage to let Frasier know what's going on pretty quickly, and he seems to catch on. But Frasier talks to Daphne in the kitchen and is trying to say, "What on earth are you doing?" And she kind of explains. And then Martin comes home, and in quick succession, we have Niles, then Frasier, then Daphne saying, "Dad, Dad, Dad." And it's so delightful. And Martin's reaction to that, I absolutely loved. And Martin, throughout this, definitely had a lot of fun because once he realised what was going on, he knew that he could have some fun with this, and Clive asks him what he did now that he's retired, and Martin decides to say that he was an astronaut. And Martin just has a grin on his face pretty much all throughout this. I absolutely love it. And then there's somebody else at the door. And I did have that moment of kind of thinking, well, Niles and Martin and Daphne and Frasier are already there. Who can this be? Well, it's Maris. It's not actually Maris, it's Roz. But Martin decided, Frasier called through the door, "Who is it?" And we hear Roz saying, "It's me." And Martin says, "Oh, it's Maris." And Frasier manages very quickly to tell Roz that she's Maris and she has to play along. And then she sees Clive and is instantly attracted to him. And honestly, there was something about the way Roz behaved, even though she wasn't behaving unlike Roz, that kind of made me think she was Maris. Like, I could see Maris behaving the way she did. It was really quite fascinating, and I rather enjoyed it. I'm laughing because I've just seen the next thing in my notes, and this is because Clive points out to Daphne that her name in the phone book, that's obviously how he got her phone number, is still Moon. And I believe it was Niles who said it must be an old phone book. She hyphenates it now. It's Moon. It's funny, I promise. It's Moon Crane. And Martin, the astronaut, said, "I remember the first time I drove a Moon Crane." It is such a perfectly written episode, and the performances are just so wonderful. And Daphne begins to regret this lie because she finds out that Clive actually has a thriving business now, and he's physically quite attractive, and he's not the Clive that she left. And now she's beginning to think, oh, maybe I could have had a chance with him, but now I've lied and said I'm married. But she's still flirting with him. And Roz is flirting with him. And that must be really awkward for Clive, because both of these women, both of whom are allegedly married to two men who are in the same room, and they're flirting with Clive. Clive must be incredibly uncomfortable, but it's very funny. And Ross and Daphne begin to compete. And Ross happens to mention that Daphne's eating for two. And eventually Niles mentions that his brother is impotent. It's Frasier's response that I loved in that moment. He's lying down defeated on the sofa, and he just kind of throws his arms up in the air, and clearly Frasier is just going along with whatever they're saying. He's kind of checked out of the situation, and I rather enjoyed it a lot. And Clive ends up declaring that they're the worst family ever, and he ends up leaving. And they point out that they're not as bad as we seem. We've been lying to you all evening, which I rather loved. And he leaves, still thinking that Martin is an astronaut, which is delightful. And it ends with Daphne, Niles, and Frasier eating cookies, and it just goes from one mad thing to the next, and the pace of the escalation is fantastic. Obviously, it starts off a little slowly, with Daphne telling the lie that she's married to Niles, and then we bring in other characters one by one, and as soon as everybody is involved, it just goes off like a rocket, very much like the ones Martin would have flown in as an astronaut, and it's just explosive by the end of it, and so fantastic. The moon crane thing is going to amuse me for a very long time. It's so fun. It's so funny. Very well written. Great performances. It does not surprise me that it is one of the top rated episodes on IMDb. If you haven't seen it, I realise I've just spoiled it, but it doesn't matter. It does not matter if I've spoiled it, because me sharing these quotes, it does nothing for their delivery. Much, much funnier when they deliver the lines, of course. Absolutely fantastic. And needless to say, The Two Mrs. Cranes is an absolutely fantastic start to season 4. It's just perfect, it's funny, brilliantly written, the pacing is amazing, even though we spend pretty much all of the episode, apart from a brief trip to KCL, in the apartment. It never gets stale. Never get bored of the same environment. We have a lot going on, and it just goes from one crazy scenario to the next, and I absolutely adore it. Moon Crane is fantastic. I love Martin. Martin's absolutely fantastic. I love them all. I love the two Mrs. Cranes. Needless to say, this is an absolutely fantastic episode and a truly solid start to season 4 of Frasier.